Henry Turner and the Mystery of the Missing Sister. Chapter 2: Initial Investigation. The following morning, Henry Turner arrived at the Prescott Mansion, a grand estate on the outskirts of the city. The sprawling grounds and opulent architecture stood in stark contrast to the gritty urban environment he was accustomed to. As he approached the front door, a butler greeted him, leading him inside to meet James Prescott. "Thank you for coming, Detective Turner," James said, his eyes heavy with worry. "I've arranged for you to speak with everyone who might have information about Emily's disappearance." Henry nodded, taking in the lavish surroundings. "Let's start with her immediate circle. Who did she interact with regularly?" James led Henry to a spacious sitting room where he introduced him to the household staff. First was Mrs. Carter, the housekeeper, an older woman with a stern demeanor and a keen eye for detail. She was followed by Emily's personal maid, Clara, a young woman who seemed visibly distressed by the recent events. "I'll start with Clara," Henry said, gesturing for the maid to sit. Clara took a seat, wringing her hands nervously. "Miss Prescott was in good spirits the night of the gala," she began, her voice trembling. "She wore a stunning red gown, and she seemed excited about the event. Did she mention anything unusual or out of the ordinary?" Henry asked, his tone gentle but probing. Clara shook her head. "Not really. She did receive a phone call just before leaving. She seemed a bit tense afterward, but she didn't say who it was." Henry made a mental note of this. "What about the staff here? Did anyone notice anything strange in the days leading up to her disappearance?" Mrs. Carter spoke up. "There were no signs of trouble, Detective. Miss Prescott was her usual self, busy with social engagements and charity work. She was always kind to the staff, and there were no conflicts that I was aware of." Henry thanked them for their time and turned to James. "I'd like to see her room next." James led him up a grand staircase to Emily's bedroom. The room was elegantly decorated, with a large canopy bed, an antique vanity, and a walk-in closet filled with designer clothes. Henry's eyes scanned the room, looking for anything that might offer a clue. He noticed a diary on the nightstand and picked it up. "Do you mind if I take a look?" "Of course, anything that helps," James replied. Henry flipped through the pages, noting entries about Emily's busy social calendar and her thoughts on various events. A recent entry caught his attention. "Gala tonight. Feeling a bit anxious. Charles will be there. Need to talk to him about Richard." "Who's Charles?" Henry asked, looking up. "Charles Montgomery," James answered. "He's a businessman and an old friend of the family. He's been close to Emily for years, though I never fully trusted him." "And Richard?" Henry probed further. "Richard Hale, Emily's fiancé," James explained. "They were set to be married in a few months. He's been frantic since she went missing." Henry closed the diary and handed it back to James. "I need to speak with Richard Hale and Charles Montgomery as soon as possible." James nodded. "I'll arrange it. Richard is at his office downtown, and Charles has a penthouse in the city. I'll have someone drive you." Henry thanked him and made his way back downstairs. As he exited the mansion, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this case than met the eye. Emily's diary hinted at hidden tensions and possible conflicts, and Henry was determined to uncover the truth. The drive to Richard Hale's office was quick, but Henry used the time to review what he knew so far. Emily's disappearance seemed carefully orchestrated, and the key to solving it lay in understanding her relationships and the secrets she kept. Arriving at the sleek office building, Henry was greeted by Richard Hale's assistant and led to a spacious corner office. Richard, a well-dressed man in his mid-30s, stood up to greet him, his expression a mix of worry and exhaustion. "Detective Turner, thank you for coming. Any news about Emily?" Richard asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "Not yet, Mr. Hale," Henry replied, "but I need to ask you a few questions. When was the last time you saw Emily?" "At the gala," Richard said, sitting down. "She seemed distant that night. We had a brief argument about some trivial matter, but I never imagined she would disappear." Henry studied Richard's face, looking for any signs of deceit. "Did Emily mention anyone or anything that might have upset her?" Richard hesitated, then shook his head. "No, nothing specific. She did seem concerned about something, but she wouldn't tell me what it was." Henry pressed on. "What about Charles Montgomery? How well do you know him?" Richard's expression hardened. "Charles and I have never seen eye to eye. He's always had an interest in Emily, but she assured me they were just friends. Still, I've never trusted him." Henry noted Richard's animosity towards Charles. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Hale. I'll be in touch." Leaving Richard's office, Henry felt the first pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Next, he needed to confront Charles Montgomery, a man who seemed to be at the center of Emily's concerns. The penthouse was a stark contrast to Richard's office, lavish and ostentatious. Charles Montgomery welcomed Henry with a confident smile, offering him a drink. "Detective Turner, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Charles asked, his tone smooth and untroubled. Henry declined the drink. "I'm investigating Emily Prescott's disappearance. I understand you were close to her." Charles's smile faded slightly. "Emily is a dear friend. Her disappearance is deeply troubling. How can I assist you?" Henry wasted no time. "Did you speak with Emily at the gala?" "Yes, briefly," Charles replied. "She seemed anxious about something, but she didn't go into details. We talked about her upcoming wedding and some business matters, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary." Henry leaned forward. "And your relationship with Richard Hale? I've heard it's less than amicable." Charles chuckled. "Richard is protective of Emily. We've had our differences, but I assure you, I wish her no harm." As Henry left the penthouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that Charles was hiding something. The pieces were slowly coming together, but the picture was still unclear. Emily's fate hung in the balance, and Henry knew he had to dig deeper to uncover the truth. Back at his office, Henry spread out the notes and evidence on his desk. The connections between Emily, Richard, and Charles were tangled, and he needed to untangle them to find Emily. The investigation had only just begun, but Henry was determined to follow every lead, no matter where it led.